to discuss the refugee crisis after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where more than 1 million Ukrainians have fled their homeland into neighboring countries, according to the United Nations. Foreign students and non-whites continue to face problems as they're leaving. To discuss this and much more, we have with us Jaime Webbe. She is the president and CEO at United Nations Association in Canada. Thank you so much for joining us, Jaime.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jaime, please first let us know, what is the work that the United Nations Association does on the ground for refugees? So a little bit of a broader background. And then if you could give us an update from the ground specifically about this new refugee crisis.
Thank you. Typically, the United Nations Association in Canada works domestically with refugees once they've arrived here in Canada. We run a number of employment programs to match refugees with good quality jobs. We run a number of training and empowerment programs. And we also have some really unique programming where we provide opportunities to Canadians and Canadian refugees to participate in UN processes, either as interns in UN agencies or as delegates to UN meetings. So our mission and mandate is to grow global citizens, and we do that largely in Canada. The new crisis has shifted our work, though. Earlier this weekend, I had a discussion with our sister organization, the United Nations Association in Poland. And they're on the ground helping refugees who are arriving from Ukraine to be settled in Poland and to find the help and support that they need. They're not able to do as much as they need, though, and they're often having to say no and to turn away from support. Earlier this week, they helped 4 Nigerian nationals who are at the border to get across the border into Poland and to find temporary housing in Warsaw. And they want to do more to help minorities that are being excluded from some of the other assistance that's being provided by agencies. In order to help with that, we've been creating awareness about what the United Nations Association in Poland is doing to help Ukrainian refugees, regardless of their race or background, and to raise funds so that they can find more temporary housing and that they can provide support that the refugees need. What we've actually seen at the moment is the nature of that support has changed. When we first engaged in Poland, there was an urgent need for direct humanitarian assistance, things like clothes, blankets, medicine. Now what we're seeing is that there's been a flood of those supplies, but a number of the refugees are now left in welcome centers where all they have is access to a bed and a basket in which to keep their belongings. What we're trying to do with the UN Association Poland is help refugees to start living their lives again in Poland while they wait for the next step, whether it's a return to Ukraine or moving onwards to Canada, the US, or other countries that have opened their doors to them.
What happens as sort of guide us through the road that a refugee would take to get to the border and get into Warsaw? We are seeing images of packed train stations. What is happening? So I'd like for you to walk us through that path that a refugee is taking.
It's so difficult when you're not on the ground to truly understand what the circumstances are that would drive somebody to leave their home and the emotions and feelings that must accompany that, especially when they're having to leave behind family and everything that they know. We're getting briefings, not just from our partners in Poland, but also the International Organization for Migration in Ukraine, where we have a number of Canadian interns placed, conducting internships with them, thankfully remotely. And what we're hearing is of refugees that are finding any outlet that they can, that once the decision is made to move, they're heading largely to the Polish border, but we're also hearing stories from refugees that are crossing into Romania and Moldova as well. We've heard that in Romania and Moldova, the situation is much more difficult for refugees. While the number of refugees that are flowing to those countries is lower, compared to the population and the capacity of the countries, there's a much higher burden put upon Romania and Moldova, as an example, compared to Poland. So in fact, what we're hearing is that the travel to the Polish border and processing across the Polish border is the easiest route for refugees to take. But it's still not easy. We're hearing stories of Families with small children having to wait 30, 40 hours on the Ukrainian side of the border before they even get into Poland. We're hearing stories about women with young children and nothing but a shopping bag as the sum total of their memories and supplies that they could bring with them. Once they enter Poland, if the refugees have friends or family in Poland, which many Ukrainian nationals do, they're moving on to that housing. But a lot of the foreign nationals that are in Ukraine don't have that support system. So they're staying in the welcoming centers with limited facilities until additional support can be provided. What we're hearing is that for Ukrainian nationals, Poland is waiving the visa requirements and they're welcome to stay for as long as they want. Ukrainian children are being registered into Polish schools at this stage, and temporary housing is being found. For non-Ukrainian nationals, the situation is quite a bit different. Those countries that are extending visas are extending short-term visas, 15 days in Poland, for example, for non-Ukrainian nationals. And there isn't the support system there, and there isn't the attempt to integrate the refugees and find them a longer-term solution in Poland. It's more of a stop-off point, and refugees are largely left to find their own way to the next place that can support them or provide them shelter during these times.
Have we seen embassies step in across the world to get their nationals out?
We haven't really been in touch with many of the embassies at this stage. We're reaching out to the Nigerian embassy to see how we can offer support for their nationals that are arriving in Poland. We have heard stories that many of the African nation embassies are trying to mobilize and provide support for their nationals, but what that support is, we're not entirely sure. We do know that the UN Information Center is putting out a call to the United Nations Association in Poland to assist with nationals from a number of African countries, which tends to imply that they're not getting the support from the embassy and are having to look at other avenues. At the moment, the ability of us as UN associations to provide that support is limited, but we are actively fundraising to try to make sure that we can direct support to those refugees that are not provided with any additional support through either the Polish government or through their own home country embassies.
How can, if you could share that with us, how can people here in the United States help?
What we have done is we've asked our partners and said, what is it that's really needed? How can we help the most? How can we contribute the most? The message that I got this morning from our colleagues on the ground is that there's an urgent need to support with the integration and a support for especially families with young children. So providing support through temporary housing is a really critical need that needs to be met. Moving people out of welcoming centers, regardless of which country it's in, into an apartment, somewhere where they can cook the food that they're used to cooking, somewhere where they can sleep in rooms, in separate rooms, where they can start to rebuild as a family and where children can continue to grow and to thrive, is one of the most urgent needs that we've heard of. The other urgent need that we've heard is the need for people to be able to tell their stories and for people around the world to listen. We want to make sure that they're not filtered through the lens of media who are, in some cases, not presenting the most important elements from the perspective of these refugees, but are presenting the storyline that they want to see. We have started a fundraising campaign for these two purposes. You can support that by going to www.unac.org. All of those proceeds are going to support refugees as they cross over into Poland.
Thank you so much for your time and for your efforts for people who are going through one of the greatest crises right currently.
It's my pleasure. We just wish we could do more.